like we did in the promo. And we're live. It surprised me as well. Hi everyone. I'm happy to welcome my spooky YA panel. We should have Jim Oddy joining us in a little bit, but before that, we'll start off with the authors we do have introducing themselves and telling us a little bit about their book, starting with Andrew.
Hey, I'm AJ Hartley. My spooky books for Halloween are Cold Bath Street and Written Stone Lane, which are ghost stories set in Preston, Lancashire, which is where I grew up in the late 1970s.
Sophie?
Hi, I'm Sophie Green. I'm a children's librarian and from East Anglia and an author. And my books are, let me get this in the right place this time, Pocken and Stubbs series. There are 3 books. Pocken and Stubbs is the first one, and then Haunting of Pelican City, and then Ghost Catcher, which was out last year. And they are spooky detective noir for kids. And it's basically the story of Lil Popkin, who's an aspiring teenage reporter, and Lil lives in a city called Pelican City, which is rain-soaked and corrupt, and there's no free press in Pelican City. There's only this underground newspaper called the Klaxon, and Lil Popkin really wants to write for the Klaxon, but she needs a really big scoop to get in it because it's all the undercover reporters who write for the Klaxon. Anyway, one day she finds a big scoop when she meets Nedley Stubbs, who's a very mysterious boy who no one else can see. And Nedley's been missing for over a year and nobody knows why. So Lil decides to take his case, get her scoop, and in so doing, she uncovers a big mystery around Pelican City, which changes her life and the lives of everyone who lives there.
Good description. Zoe?
Yeah, hi, I'm Zoe. I am an accountant by day and an author and blogger in the evening. I wrote my debut novel, Ouija, which I have a copy as well. It's book 2 in the ? Horror series. Jim wrote book 1. My book is about 6 teenagers who go back to a high school and decide on the anniversary of a horrific event to do an Ouija board and unleash something they're not quite ready for.
And Jim?
Yep. Hi. So I'm Jim Oddy. So I write predominantly psychological thrillers. So I've written 16, but I also write young adult and horror as well. So as Zoe said, I've written the first book in the ? Horror series. Let me see if I can get that, which is called Camp Death. And that is about a lad called Richie, who is taken to a camp by his parents, along with his sister. And the camp isn't quite what they expected. They thought it was going to be kind of a nice retreat, but the children get kind of pushed into little groups in cabins away from the adults, and there's some swings on, and it kind of twists and turns from there, really.
Nice. So let's start off with all of you telling us how you find it getting that balance between having the books just spooky enough for young people to be sort of properly scared, but not going too far, because it must be a really fine balance to achieve in your books, and you've all managed it really well. But how do you pull that off? Should we carry on going around? So we start with Andrew again.
Okay, sure. So Cold Bath Street is a story in which my main character dies in the first chapter. So the amount of bad things that can happen to him after that are limited because he's already dead. But there are worse things, it turns out. So, I don't have to deal with ideas of, sort of graphic violence, for example, because the story that I'm telling is entirely about spirit, right? It's about the idea that this character is trapped in this version of the town that he lived in, where there are no people and only other ghosts, some of which are dangerous. But the kind of dangers that he's going to face are, spiritual dangers rather than physical dangers. So it helps in the sense that I don't have to deal with the kind of graphic horror that you might get in some adult stories. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. What about you, Sophie? Because you've got a really detective noir style theme going on for quite young children.
Yeah, I mean, I balance quite a lot of my more kind of creepy moments with comedy, and that kind of gets me. It relieves the tension for me, and probably for the reader as well. But I think what's really scary in stories is the ideas, kind of the concepts are scary. So it's almost a case of telling someone just enough, and then letting their imagination fill in, kind of what actually makes it creepy. So I kind of find inferring stuff works better than spelling out. Once you've, as we all know from watching horror films, once you've seen the monster, it's never quite as scary. It's that feeling, what you can't see. So I like to have kind of lots of corner of the eye type stuff, and also draw on lots of stuff from my own childhood that I find creepy. I mean, I find it creepy because it's from my childhood, but it's all things which I found do chime with other people, like creepy toys and just the idea of abandoned places. They're kind of tropes that they chime with us all. But a lot of my influences came from Scooby-Doo, so I'm probably not quite as scary as a few others.
We got some love coming in on the stream for them as a great duo. Zoe, how do you manage to balance that horror?
I don't know. I've been told off by quite a few adults that have read it that I've scared them, and they don't want to take any showers, look in mirrors, or see any dolls ever again. So I'm not quite sure at the moment. I found I scared myself when I was writing it. I think because, like what Sophie said, I was using stories and things that I thought about that used to scare me when I was a child, and things that still unsettle what I love in horror books that unsettled me. So I tried to play a lot on that. I used, as Sophie said, the corner of the eye to things like random ideas I had, and like the things that make your your skin sort of crawls when you're in, like, is there someone behind you, that sort of thing. I tried to play up on that a little bit, but was conscious I couldn't go OTT at the same time. But I read a lot of point horrors and Goosebumps and sort of young adult books, so I kind of gauged as far as I could go to a limit anyway.
Yeah, I think reading a lot of the genre really helps.
Yeah.
What about you?
Yes, I mean, I write adult horror as well as young adult horror. So I guess for me, it's kind of the contrast between the two. So for the adult horror, I tend to be more kind of explicit in, how scenes are set, I guess how people die and all that sort of thing. Whereas it's very much feelings and, building up suspense and that kind of tension, I guess, that I try to do more with the young adult. I guess with a bit of a kind of a Blair Witch feel, in so much as you're not showing much, but everyone's on edge because they feel like something's going to happen. So I think it's trying to build kind of that up. I'm exactly the same as Sophie, whereas I use a lot of comedy with banter between the youngsters. I always think, I try and have them play out as they would. So, even in the kind of tough times, there is that kind of gallows humor. And I think, we see that. We see people splitting off into groups. We see mick taking and, right up to, even when people are scared, and probably more so when they get scared, because the characters use the humor themselves to kind of hide from each other the fact that they're scared, because, a lot of the teens don't to show that outside of themselves. Whereas I think probably more in the adult ones, they are probably at that point where they don't care what other people think, and a little bit more kind of expressive, whereas the teens are very much hiding, still trying to find themselves and trying to, try and be cool all the time. So yeah, I guess that's the kind of the way I try and play it.
Good answer. I don't hang with any teens, even as a teacher, that think that they're trying to be cool all the time. Luckily, all the ones that I hang with are all massive nerds. We've got a really good question on here. It says, if it won't give anything away, do you have a favourite scene from your latest novel? Who wants to start us off with that one? You're all like looking off into the distance. It's really studious. Like, I have so many to choose from.
There is something to choose from, I think.
Andrew, do you have a favourite scene from your latest novel?
Man, why do I have to start?
Would you like me to pick on someone
Every
else?
time, no, it's like I say something and then I go around and I thought, oh, I should have said that. I mean, I like. I don't know if you saw it. I posted the video of reading the first chapter of Cold Bath Street, and I do really like that scene because it's obviously it's the start of the book, and it's the main character walking home, and he gets attacked by a ghost, and he wakes up and realizes that he's dead. And I love it because it was where the story came from. I love the idea of telling a ghost story from the perspective of the ghost, which is something I haven't read very much of, and then to try and think, if you're dead, how much worse can things get, and to sort of push into what it means to be dead. and particularly if you think of in this case death as a kind of limbo, a kind of a sort of moment before whatever is supposed to happen next, and he's trapped in this moment and has to then figure out ways to sort of work through the problems that other ghosts have in order to somehow release himself, to move on to whatever is supposed to happen next. But I love that subverting the reader expectation. The one thing you don't expect is for your main character to die in the first chapter. So there was something quite satisfying about that. It's like blowing up the world in The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. The one thing you never do.
Good answer. Jim.
Oh, now we're changing the order.
I'm messing up the order now that Andrew's complained.
My favourite scene are always the same ones, which is because all of my books so far have twists to them. It's always the big reveals, and I always really enjoy those. And I'm pretty sure I have a smile on my face when I'm typing them out because I'm just trying to picture what a reader is thinking. And as anyone who's read any of my books will know, I often kind of try and put little Easter eggs all the way through, try and put little hints without trying to give it away. That's kind of the idea. And I love, it's the same as if I'm watching movies and you get the reveal in that, or even like a Sherlock Holmes or a Jonathan Creek. It's that part where you suddenly, you yourself as either a viewer or a reader are going, oh, I get that. And suddenly all these dots are suddenly joined together. So that's what I try to do with them. So it doesn't really matter which book it is that I'm writing. That's always my so definitely. I mean, in the book I'm writing at the moment, there's another scene that I haven't written yet. And it's a very Saw-esque. I'm kind of setting the plot up at the moment, and there's going to be some nice gruesome decisions that people have to make in order to whether they will survive or whether the person they're with survives. So I'm enjoying thinking about how I'm going to get to that in a not very nice way.
Your face froze brilliantly then as you were talking. Sophie, favourite scene from your latest novel?
Yeah, well, one of the books I've been working on lately is not a crime or a spooky book, but there's a scene in it, and it was inspired by one of my favourite scenes in children's books, which is that moment in the BFG when Sophie is in her dormitory and she looks out of the window at 3 in the morning or 12 at night or something, and she sees the BFG coming down the street, and it's so frightening, the idea that she's seen this incredibly tall, creepy, coated character leaning in through the windows. It really frightened me when I was a kid, and I think what I love about that moment is it's the moment where everything changes, and it's a bit like in Andrew's book once Preston's dead, everything, you know that everything is going to be different. Everything you kind of, however you thought it was going to work out, it's not going to be there. And it's unsettling, and it kind of pulls the rug out. And I love that moment. So I've got a scene in a book which I'm working on at the moment, which is similarly someone looking out the window and seeing something, and then seeing that thing, realizing the world is not the way they thought it was, and that their world is going to be changed, and making that decision. And so that's I can't really tell you too much about it, but that's the kind of the feel of the scene.
Zoe, you got a favourite scene?
So from Ouija, I've got a couple, but it's going to be hard to tell you about my favourite scene without giving anything away. But I grew up loving sort of all things Arnold Schwarzenegger. So one of my favourite scenes was was Terminator 2, when they're in the arcade and they're running through the tunnel, the mirrors. So I added a scene in my book that just had to have mirrors, creepy lights, lots of sounds, and the lights going off. So that was one of my favourite scenes, but it was also one of the scenes that actually made me cry when I wrote it. I'm not going to say who, what, when and why, but that was one of them. And I think the other one of my favourite scenes is when they're just in the lead up to doing the Ouija board, and you sort of get to know the group of friends, and they're setting up the room, and when all hell breaks loose. And yeah, that was one of my favourite scenes to write.
So I'm going to pick at random this time. We've got another question on here that says, what are the panel's favourite horror tropes? So get your thinking caps on. Of your favourite horror tropes, and Zoe's going to start us off.
Oh no! I can't even think of any horror tropes right now. Oh my god, I don't know.
I've got
Can
one.
you give it to me?
I've got one, which is I'm a big fan of Stephen King, and I love the kind of small town daylight. Everything seems normal. You should be safe, and then you see something out of the corner of your eye across the road, and you realize there is no safety in the small American town. That's one of my favorite. That kind of introducing something frightening into what should be a kind of safe place.
Yeah, I was going to say something similar, actually. I really like, and this you see a lot in Stephen King, that sort of mirroring in the supernatural world of whatever the threat is or the problem, and you see a version of it in the ordinary lives of people as well, right? You see characters who are dealing with a certain, I don't know, some sort of personal relationship issue, and then somehow that gets manifested in the paranormal part as well. But so the story feels like that the scary part, the supernatural part, isn't like completely separate from reality. It's just reality seen through a kind of kaleidoscopic lens where it magnifies and distorts, but the problems are real problems. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's really a good way of describing it.
Jim, have you got a favourite horror trope?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'm quite character driven. So a lot of the time with mine, it is turning things on its head. So often the characters that seem the most innocent are actually the ones that you need to watch out for. And so I like to build them, obviously trying to gain the trust of the reader into certain characters. And, it turns out that they're the ones that you shouldn't have been run into. And actually the ones you were running away from probably the ones that, vice versa should have been the other way around. So I kind of like to always put things on their head. And I guess the way I write is I write up to a crossroads and I think, what would the reader expect? And do I go the other way? And I try and kind of do that all the time, because I think there's nothing worse than people guessing an ending. And so I do my best that people won't guess the ending and will want to read to the end. As to whether they enjoy the ending, that's completely different. But, I like to keep people guessing and give them something a little bit different.
Zoe, have you got one now?
I thought of some now. I guess for me, I always love the haunted house sort of stories, you know, where you know something bad happened in the past, and you always got stupid people like me who want to go to the house and experience it and go at midnight and go with just torches and batteries that are going to run out and listen to all the bumps in the night. I just love all that sort of thing, something that could unsettle me like that. And then the other one I quite like is thinking back to one of my favourite horror films growing up was Fright Night, with the not knowing the neighbour next door. So you know, he turned out to be a vampire, but then it was a case of you never quite knew if it was him imagining it in his dreams or if there actually was a vampire living next door. So that kind of thing I quite like as well.
Good. I think you can't beat a good spooky witch. Anything. Bit witchcraft.
Well, that could be the worst of them all half the time.
Favorite spooky read? It's Halloween. Tell us your favorite. If you had to go and pick one Halloween read, what's your favorite one? And you can't pick your own.
I actually have one.
Do you want to go first, then, Zoe?
Okay. I have two go-to authors when it comes to horror. One, and they're not young adults though, but one's Richard Layman. I don't think you can go anything wrong with him. But my favourite sort of scary book, and I tell this to everyone, is the Siren and the Specter by Jonathan Janz, and it's it is creepy as hell. It's another one where you go to a house that you're not allowed to go to, but these people go anyway, and they try to buy this house, and it really unsettled me. And it was one of those ones you read it and you're like, why am I reading this at night with only a little bedside light on, and what's in that corner over there, and was that a shadow over there that just moved? It was just completely unsettled me. So yeah, that one.
Good, Sophie?
I don't really read many horror books. I do like spooky short stories. So Edgar Allan Poe, M.R. James, any of those kind of ones which like set up something creepy, maybe don't give too much away. I mean, I like Stephen King. I had to give up on it because it's too creepy. I just think it's unlike a film. You can't close your eyes and block up your ears. You have to keep reading, and I just get too scared. So yeah, short stories are the only ones that work for me. And the short stories are great because they're such powerful ideas. Even though they're only short, you can't really forget. Some of them are, continue to haunt me now. So yeah.
I'll add a Stephen King. I will say the book that really got me into Stephen King was It. And one of the thing I love about that is that I think he's got a sort of pitch perfect memory of what it is to be 12, or that sort of age. I think, he evokes that really, really well. The way that the kids, that aspect of the book and the way that, again, ordinary things become scary, and the things that kids are, the kids that are always afraid of, but in this it's real, and it turns out to be real because the core of the story is about something manifesting your darkest fears, right? That it sort of it taps into those and makes them real. I think there's something really terrifying about that, and it's a beautifully written book. I love that. And I was also going to say, since you mentioned scary witches, Joe Delaney's, I forget what they're called in the UK. Is it the Spook's Apprentice or the?
Oh yeah, fantastic.
And they're also set in Lancashire, which is how I came across them. And the first one is one of the first children's books that actually gave me nightmares. And reading it as an adult, right? And there's a scene where the character is sort of buried in this like a vertical pit, like a shaft, and there is a witch sort of clawing her way through to him, and it's absolutely, and it gave me nightmares. I mean, brilliant.
Yeah, it's such a good series. I second that.
Yeah.
I'd forgotten those. I was just going to try and find it on my bookshelf because it's one of my favourite YA series. I think Spook's Apprentice is the first one here.
Right.
But yeah, absolutely brilliant. So chilling.
Go on, Jim. Finish us off. Favourite spooky read?
I mean, this year I read the book Imaginary Friend, which I thought was brilliant. It's a huge book. It's about 1,000 pages or something like that. But I just thought it was great. It's so, you know, it's kind of young adults that they've got a kind of I guess a little cabin in the woods that they've made, and it's just all the weird and bizarre things that happen from there, really. So that's really good. I'm exactly the same as Zoe. I grew up with Richard Layman, so I love absolutely all of his books. So things like Darkness Terrace and Funland. I absolutely love those books. And Christopher Pike. So any of his, really. I don't tend to read books more than once as a rule. I'll collect them again and we'll keep them. But no, those are all my favourites.
Do you read books more than once? Oh, I read
Not
my favourite books. I read a lot more than once.
I do
Depends on
them,
the book.
yeah, I do them on audio. I like
Yeah.
revisiting a book through the audio, through the narration.
So apparently someone stole my question earlier for their panel. It must have been Sam. So she's asking you it now. She says, have you ever fallen down a research rabbit hole? What's the most interesting thing you've ever discovered whilst researching? Jim, do you want to go first? I keep coming to you last. You can go first for once.
I'm constantly down rabbit holes. I tend to think I'm going to change my address to rabbit hole. And you know, like probably like most authors, once you get distracted from your writing, it's very easy to go from one thing to another and struggle to get back. I mean, I've researched absolutely everything and anything that you can imagine. Everything from kind of ADHD pills to tin mining to silver mining to, you know, you name it. Really, I'll try and think of something completely different. And you know, as you know, we want to have correct research. You know, even if you're just fleetingly putting a subject in, you want to make sure you're going to get that right, because you know it's going to come back to you in a review if you don't. So it stands to reason to do that. So yeah, I mean, I could sit here and rattle off a load, but it would take me a long time. Lots of weird and wonderful things.
Weird and wonderful things. The most interesting research rabbit hole you've been down, Sophie?
Yeah, I really can't think of anything. I do go down science rabbit holes. So anything, anywhere which touches on science, like when I was thinking about Ghost Catcher, and I was imagining how that could work. How could somebody catch a ghost? Like, what would ghosts be made of? All that kind of stuff. But I think for me, what happens is I start going down the route, and then eventually I feel like it's kind of holding me back. Like I've gone too far, and I know too much to imagine it anymore, and I've realized it's not possible, or what I wanted doesn't work, and then I have to kind of pedal back to like just because most readers won't have gone down that same rabbit hole. So I kind of think you probably end up taking it more seriously than you would. I think if you're setting it like Popcorn and Subs was set in kind of it was our world, but not exactly our world. So it's not sci-fi, but it's not it's kind of like a 50s version, like a cartoony Gothamish version of the 50s. So I didn't really I researched things like what models of cars. That's the kind of boring research I do. Like what models of cars would have been around there? What kind of typewriters might they have had? That's the kind of thing that I research, but I don't really go down rabbit holes of it. Although I love research, I just find that it's too easy to get sucked in.
As a science teacher, it makes me happy that you're researching science.
Oh, I love the science.
Makes my heart happy. I'm doing some science. Zoe, most interesting research rabbit hole?
Well, funny enough, when I was looking up different things to do with the Ouija board, at the point I was researching, I didn't actually know who or what they would be summoning, and I come across something on one of these Ouija board websites. I mean, I think I lost hours and hours looking at all this sort of stuff and the rules and everything. And I came across someone had mentioned Pazazu, who is the demon in my book. And it was only because someone mentioned when you summon him on a Ouija board, you know you've got him because of the letters it spells out. He does Z-O, Z-O. And I think I messaged Jim and Matt of QMP as well. And I had to put it in straight because growing up, my nickname was Zozo. I was like, oh my God, I never knew this. So I was like, well, that then led on to all this other research about Pizzazz and what he really was, what he looked like. And he's nothing like what he's portrayed in my book or in The Exorcist, because I think it was The Exorcist that actually made him into what we all know him as now. And then with the ways the characters died, I had to be careful because, again, so I was doing a lot of sort of medical research on how the different characters died and can they do it like this. And yeah, that was all quite interesting so I lost quite a few hours doing all that. I've got like pages and pages of A4 notes, and I think, oh, I've got to write this down now rather than just research it. So I had to sort of cut it off after a while. But yeah.
Good one. Andrew?
I think for me, the Coldbath Street, I wrote after I'd done some YA in which, I mean, the last YA series I'd done was called Steeplejack, and it was set in a world that looked sort of like Victorian South Africa. And I felt like I was writing a lot of characters who were very not like me in terms of my own immediate experience. And so when I came to Coldbath Street, I wanted to write a story that grew specifically out of my own adolescence. And that meant putting it in period and in Preston, in Lancashire. And I haven't lived there for 30 years or more. So so the fun and the challenge in part was trying to sort of evoke that world as precisely as I could, you know, and some of that was about my own memories, and then some of it became about research because, of course, your own memories are frequently wrong. And I realized, you know, one of the great things about the internet was having access to, you know, what was in the top 40 in September 1978, and if you were around in that time, you know, and just the titles of those songs immediately put you back in that moment, you know, and you know, getting into the sort of the feel of what the characters would be, you know, how Preston North End were doing that season, and those kind of things that ground the story in a very specific moment. I really enjoyed doing that kind of research, just sort of layering the reality, because as you know, when you're writing a supernatural story, the more concrete you can make the real stuff, the more room you have to push the fantasy stuff, the made up stuff.
Before I move on to another question, I'm going to read Laura Hamilton's comment from here because it's past me. She said Stephen King's It is nothing compared to Collywobble off of CBeebies. Anyone watch CBeebies? Apparently that thing gives her nightmares. So if you ever want like a really spooky thing, go and watch CBeebies. Someone tries to trick her into watching it, apparently. I used to be terrified of Doctor Who when I was little because my brother told me the monsters were real.
Mm-hmm. I used to be terrified of Doctor Who because when I was little, Tom Baker was Doctor Who, and he was so frightening. I was not scared of anything else but him.
This is called a misreading.
So following on from that, we've got, what does horror allow you to do that crime doesn't? Would you classify your books as horror?
I wouldn't personally. I think of mine as a sort of supernatural suspense rather than straight horror. But I think the answer to the question would be the same, is that I mean, simply put, it allows you not to have to rely on reality. Right? That you don't have to make everything explainable in sort of conventional real world terms, and that opens up some possibilities for storytelling that I think are different, not necessarily better, but different.
It takes away that having to go down the research rabbit hole as well, doesn't it, a little bit?
Yeah. So long as the rules of the story are consistent, so long as you sort of set, I mean, in my case, it's like, what does it mean to be a ghost? What can you do to a ghost? How can ghosts interact with real living people? you know, so long as the stories that set those rules and obey them, then I think you can do whatever you want.
I also think it's kind of I love messing around with genre, and I think of the 3 books I wrote, I was really clear when I was writing them. They're kind of almost in different genres. They're all crime and they're all spooky, and they're all kind of got comedy. But book 2 is definitely the one closest to a horror, because the sort of the end of it, which is set in an old dolls hospital, is very kind of, it takes a lot of horror tropes. But I do think it's a sliding scale from like crime, and you've got a crime thriller, and you've got thriller and horror, and you can have all those elements in a story, and it's which one carries the most weight. Because, you know, crime, ghost stories are always going to be crime stories at their root. And then if you ramp up the kind of really frightening aspects, you're going to get some kind of horror out of it. So I like to not worry too much about what it's in, but I don't think I don't think I could ever lay claim to writing a horror, because I just don't have it in me to frighten myself that much. Even though I know when you're writing a story, it's much less frightening than listening to it or reading it. But you've still got to live with those characters, haven't you? The ones that you create. And I always think, you know, at the end of the world, if there was an alternate universe and I had to spend it with the characters I created, I could live with that at the moment. But I'm not sure about you guys.
I'm thinking of the characters you've created and thinking I'm not sure I would want.
Well, you know, that's borderline, but you know.
There's some really creepy ones.
A couple.
Jim, what does horror allow you to do that crime doesn't?
I mean, I think that the biggest thing really with crime is there's always the need for an intervention of the police or a detective or some figure of authority that, you know, needs to come in to kind of sort things out. Whereas for me, I don't want them involved at all. I want it to be completely removed from worrying about anything that's procedural, or, you know, that again, you're restricted to rules and things like that. I want this to allow my imagination to just completely run wild. I try and make sure things happen within, you know, a day, 2 days, a period of time where people missing wouldn't, you know, you wouldn't notice that too much, and those sort of things. So I think it allows you to delve into that, plus border on the realms of, you know, on reality, and really push the boundaries. And I know, you know, Kaz will know this, and often in my psychological thrillers, I kind of stutter and zigzag along the realms of reality on those as well. I always try and get to a point of saying, it's not whether it could exist, it's whether can you prove that it couldn't exist. So I like to kind of question these things and push boundaries and try. I like the readers to be thinking, as well as I like to think that I do it on 2 levels. If you don't want to think about it, there's just the story there for you to read. But if you like to get caught up in how things could happen, with more question, then there's that element for you as well. And, you know, horror just allows you to open up the doors and really, you know, the doors of your mind, and really just go crazy, I think. And then depending on whether you're doing that for adults or for young adults, determines how crazy my mind gets, really.
I just use the excuse the demon can do what he wants. That's what I said. One of my friends said, but why did this happen? I said, demon did it. He went, why did this happen? The demon did it. He was like, I want an answer, but the demon did it. That's your answer. But I just find that, I think, as everyone said, you know, you're not constricted with having the facts right. I mean, as long as you can, I found, as long as I can keep to the rules per se in a horror world, so you don't go too far off key, you can have as much fun as you want. But obviously with the crime, like Jim said, you've got to have, like, the police will get involved, or there's got to be that adult presence. But at least with these ones, you can just have as much fun as you want and bend as many rules as you want and blame everybody else apart from what's actually going on, really.
So introduce us to your favourite character in your books. Tell us a little bit about the favourite character you've created. It doesn't have to be the main one. Who's your favourite one? This is another one where you all look serious and orderly. Like you're all really considering it. Jim, do you want to start with that?
Job to know in my Camp Death one. I mean, yeah, as people will know, even though I do lots of different genres, so I put my microphone up so it's a bit easier. Even though I do lots of genres and what have you, I do have a character called Jez who does appear in most of my books. So within the 16 books, I think he's in around about 11 or 12 of them. And, you know, I created him right back in my first book, Lost Connections. And he seems to be quite popular with other people. And I just enjoy writing him. So he's kind of like your friend who just says whatever he feels. He's got absolutely no filter whatsoever, but he's got a real big heart in him. And he acts like a 15-year-old lad most of the time. But he's got an overbearing wife who keeps him in check. But you don't see that side of him until she's around, and then he's quite meek and kind of scared of her. And yet there's this playful side to him as well. And I just think he's a great character, and he allows the kind of the comedic side to my stories. So contrast the darkness very well. So that helps. And it's just a bit of a light relief, I'd say. He's a great kind of sidekick to have. So your main character is usually the one that's more of the brains or whatever, and he just does really weird and bizarre things. He'll dress really bizarre. Like in one of them, he they had to go to the police station, and he dressed as a cowboy for no apparent reason. And you know, it just allows a little bit of banter and just a bit of comedic value, really. So I always try and drag him into stories, even ones that have absolutely nothing to do with him. And I guess my worlds kind of collide in a very vague way, and I guess I like that to kind of and Kaz will know my characters will often be reading my own books, but they'll always put me down as an author. They'll say I was reading this book, but the author is an absolute idiot. And so I like to do things like that, just to freshen things up.
Who wants to go next? Favorite character you've created?
Well, I kind of liked all the 6 teenagers but I think Lara and John, who are my sort of main two, mainly because they have a lot of elements that are me. So I've kind of split myself into 2 people. So you've got John, who's the brash. He wants to do the Ouija board. He wants to live life on the wild side and cause all this havoc, which I used to do. I like to think I'm a bit more grown up now. But then you got Lara, and she's just a blinking whiny person, which I own up. I can be quite whiny, so I can see that. So she's the sort of one that you either take her or you don't. And I think it was quite nice to have a bit of a play with myself, if that makes sense, in these characters. And then there was Sophie, who's she's a twin in the book. Her brother Simon's in the book, and I quite liked her character and how she was very protective over her friends, and she was always looking out for other people. So I quite liked playing with them.
Nice. Sophie?
Yeah, I love writing Abe Mandrel, who's the kind of he's the most hard-boiled character, and he's what I imagine if those kind of characters like the Dashiell, Hammett, or Raymond Chandler detectives, like where they would be if they carried on drinking and getting obsessed with cases kind of 20 years down the line. And I love him because he's a great counterpoint to the other characters that've got a lot of energy and a lot of drive, and and with the ghosts and everything, he's always struggling to kind of keep up, but he was this great detective, so he's kind of got the great backstory. He's got all the best lines, and he's just the most fun to write because I really, really enjoyed taking the kind of hard-boiled genre. I really loved that, and he kind of epitomized it. So he was the most fun to write. So he's my favorite character for that reason. I like all the characters. I'm really character-driven, but if I had to choose one, it would be him.
Good job. Andrew?
I obviously like my main characters, but I really like writing minor characters, characters who only appear for a couple of pages, because you don't have to worry about their function within the larger story very much. They have a scene or a couple of scenes, so you can do interesting things with them. And I love trying to embody a completely different voice, to find somebody and make them as real as possible. And there are a number of scattering through these books. There's a woman who appears very briefly after she sort of sees one of the ghosts, and one of my other characters goes to meet with them and has a conversation with her about what she thinks she's seen, and she's just really sort of ordinary and straightforward and very sort of Lancashire working class, the kind of people I grew up with. And one of my favorite lines in the book is when the girl asking her about this ghost experience that she says, and says, are you a medium? And the woman says, no, love, I've always been a large.
So I discovered Andrew with a conversation with a student at school where I asked her to name her Shut Up and Take My Money authors, the people who just buy their books without having to know anything other than their name was on the cover.
Oh, yeah.
And she said that you were one of hers. So I bought a book to try it out, because that's always a good recommendation. So who are your Shut Up and Take My Money authors? I have too many, by the way. That's why I'm poor.
I could go first.
Yeah.
How many were allowed?
Yeah, as many as you want.
Wow.
You're going to be here all day now.
Anything by Philip Reeve or Jonathan Stroud, I love. And also, there's an author called Edward Carey who wrote a book about Madame Tussauds, and he's recently written one about Geppetto. They're very odd kind of books. I kind of like slightly odd things. Their books definitely. And for my crime, I really love Karen Fossum and Henning Mankell, all those kind of, slightly older, maybe Scandinavian noir things. I use the library a lot, so there are loads of authors which I would definitely put my name down, but they're the ones I would spend the money. I'll spend the money straight away on.
Which one?
Oh,
who wants to go? Jim, Shut Up and Take My Money authors.
I've got again loads. A few of them unfortunately have passed away, so that's never easy. Things like Richard Layman, obviously, Peter Benchley. I really love his books. Jaws is obviously fantastic, but I loved Deep as well. And I just went back and read all of his. So that kind of mixture of marine biology along with the kind of crime and just the thrill of it all. It's fantastic. Nowadays, people like Joar Lansdale, I think, is fantastic. The way he does dark crime, but adds that kind of character banter. That's really where I kind of got that from. Going back probably 30 years now, first reading his stuff, and going down to Waterstones in my lunch hour and just looking through all of his books, just picking them up every lunchtime, putting them down, and then eventually just buying them all. So be people like that, really, I guess.
Is that right?
So in horror, same as Jim, be Richard Layman, Jonathan Jans. I know I'm going to forget loads of authors, and I'll come off and be like, oh, I should have said that one. With crime, it's Carol Wire, Noelle Holton. I'll just pick their books up straight away. Oh my god, my mind's gone blank, and I know there's loads. But yeah, they're the sort of main ones that I would instantly just. I don't read the blurbs. I'm there.
Andrew?
Terry Pratchett. I can't get enough Pratchett. And again, as Jim said, obviously he's no longer with us, so the source has dried up. But I can go back to those books over and over again. Yeah, let's just say that for now.
Good answer. Terry Pratchett, you can't go wrong with, can you? So we've got, before we finish off with sort of a recap of who you are and your books and things, we'll go with one last question, and it's, when you set out to write YA, did you expect to write the books that you did, or did they go in a completely different direction than you planned or thought? I don't know who asked that question, but it's really good. It just says Facebook user on the stream. Zoe, do you want to start us off?
I had no choice. Jim told me I had to write young adult. I mean, I've always wanted to write, but I didn't really know what to write. And Jim mentioned the series he was doing, so I said, "Oh, I have no ideas, no idea what I'm going to do." And then my idea came to me randomly when I was making the bed. I had the prologue, like it just came to me straight away. And I knew then I wanted to do something with an Ouija board, because I thought I've got experience with that. I can write something. And then I've always heard authors say this, and I never quite understand it, but it is true. A character surprised me, and the characters that survived at the end were not the ones that were meant to. It was meant to be different ones. And when I originally planned it out, and as I was writing, something else worked better. And that took me by surprise, and that wasn't in my plan at that point. So, so some things did go off quite on a bit of a tangent, and I weren't expecting.
Good answer. Who wants to go next?
I can go, I guess. For me, I think, Coldbath Street actually did not end the way I intended it to end. And I think in some ways the story became something quite different. As I said before, I wanted to write a ghost story where the protagonist was the ghost, and I also wanted to draw on my own experience growing up in the UK. But I hadn't realized until I started working on the book that I was the ghost, in the sense that when I went back to my hometown, it had sort of evolved without me, and I had become this irrelevance in my own life. So, do you know what I mean? And so there was this sense in which I actually felt like the ghost, where the world had sort of moved on, and I was sort of no longer a part of it. And the other thing is that I don't want to get too depressing, but my father died while I was writing the book. And that changed the way I thought about a lot of the things that I was writing about. So, what began as just sort of a fun, goofy adventure kind of thing became a little bit more melancholy, a little bit more reflective and searching. I mean, I think it's still a fun adventure story, but I think it takes the subject matter a little bit more seriously than I had intended to. And the ending was quite different. I had planned something very specific, and the way, I can't give away the ending, but the way that the story finished up, I had not anticipated, and it's just suddenly occurred to me as I was coming to write the very last section.
Another one where it changed as went, yeah. Jim?
Yeah, I mean, literally none of my books, I have a clue what's going to happen in them. So I will start with an idea, usually a setting, and then I just start writing. I find it so much, it works for me. It doesn't work for everyone, obviously. I can't really plan. I get bored too easy. I get distracted too easily. So I will just start writing. As Zoe said, characters will take over. Ones that were going to be in the background were going to be small parts, then become, major players. Twists and turns. My books have twists in them, but I don't worry about the twists. They don't come to me until probably between halfway through the book or 3/4 of the way through the book. And then it will suddenly hit me, and I just relax and let that happen. And then I know I have to go back and fill in to just iron things out and make sure that works, and then add a few little Easter eggs here and there. So there's a lot of rewriting, and I'll end up getting rid of chapters and adding more chapters just to make sure the continuity is all there and everything. But no, when it came to Camp Death, I was adamant it was going to be a camp, obviously for kids. I'd only written a few months before that, Little Miss Evil, which is the adult horror that's set in a camp as well. So I was very conscious not to make it anything like that whatsoever. So the two books, I hope, are completely different. And that was it. I just went with it. And yet my initial idea for the story just completely changed from that. But for me, I liked the way it went, and I just continued with that until it is what it is.
Sophie?
I don't think I've ever thought this is the age group my book is going to be for before I started writing it, because I think it's one of those things that I kind of come up with a story and then it kind of happens afterwards. Actually, with the Pocket and Stub things, as late as at the publishing stage, when there's kind of a should it be older, should it be younger, and actually it's kind of a book which is, I don't really agree with age banding, but on the back of the book it says 9+. I would probably say most of the people who read my book are adults. So I think it's kind of a marketing decision, the age thing. But I do have to say, especially listening to you guys talk, when I was young, I didn't really read any, I wasn't really into point horror, but I just wasn't exposed to it. And I feel really envious now that I didn't, because I just think it's a really great kind of rite of passage of young people to read horror books. And I think I just missed out on that. I watched the films, but I never really got into the books. And I never got into early Stephen King when I was young, all that kind of stuff. I've met kids who are like 9 saying they love Stephen King. And I feel like, why did I wait so long to get into it? Because it's such a great sort of that kind of crossover horror is a fantastic area. But yeah, so it's not something I ever really think about. I'm not sure it's a thing I would want to think about either, what age group I was writing for.
Yeah, I think it's quite hard, isn't it? Because sometimes I think things get classified into YA just because they have a young protagonist, and it doesn't necessarily mean that they are.
Yeah, I mean, with my children's librarian hat on, all kids are different, and saying, "Oh, this is a book for this age child, and this is a book for this," just doesn't. It's not really how it translates. So yeah, I mean, I know when I was writing my books, there were bits which were kind of toned down a bit, like some of the scariness was toned down a little bit to make it a little bit more accessible, but nothing huge. It does seem to come down to the age of the protagonist, but there's been like some brilliant Stephen King books with really young protagonists that are incredibly frightening. So
we're going to finish. We've got about 2 minutes left of our panel. It's been a joy talking to all of you, and we're going to go in reverse order round. So we started with Andrew to sort of tell us a bit about himself and his books when we began. So we're going to start with Jim and finish with Andrew this time.
Okay, well, I'll be quick then. So yeah, I've written 16 books, and predominantly psychological thrillers with a dark edge, but also young adult and horror. Say I've written the first book in question mark horror called Camp Death, and I've also just released the adult horror book called Little Miss Evil.
Zoe?
So my debut book, Ouija, came out end of August, and it's marked as under question mark horror. And I have got the next one, the prologue written for the next one, which I think is April, is coming out. Yeah, I don't know what else to say, really.
That was good. Well done.
Okay, so I'm a children's author and librarian. I write Pocket and Stubs books. There's all 3 at once, which are spooky, detective noir stories, a bit of comedy about kind of free press and reporting, and it's set in a kind of Gotham-like city called Pelican City. That'll be it.
And Andrew?
I'm AJ Hartley. I've published, I think, 23 novels, mystery, thriller, sci-fi, fantasy, some for adults, some for kids of various ages. The 2 that I've been talking about mostly today are Cold Bath Street and Rittenstone Lane. My most recent YA is called Impervious, which is a fantasy novel, kind of, which grew out of my experience in a school shooting. So there's that.
And then all that's left for me to say is thank you for joining us today. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.